Remember the Calgary Chinooks? How about the Calgary Spurs? Or the Calgary Royals? Or the Calgary Mustangs? As you saw in the beginning of this video, this team has definitely donned on so many nicknames and has traveled around. You might think I'm not going to be talking about 4 different teams. However, it's the same team. It just donned on 4 different nicknames during different eras in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. Me personally, I remember more with the Royals and a little bit with the Mustangs, but I think this team was always second and distant to the more successful Calgary Canucks in the Alberta Junior Hockey League, where that team was first established in 1972. So this will be episode 21 in my Remember the Calgary Series. That's why I titled it From Chinooks to Mustangs, because we're talking about the same team. We'll just cover different eras when they had those different nicknames, and it was a lot easier to find lots of relics for this particular episode, as we're not going too far back. We're going back to the 1970s up to now, when this team is now slated to move to Blackfalds, Alberta, which is just north of Red Deer. So before I get into this episode in my Remember the Calgary series, I always have to say that what inspired me to do this Remember the Calgary series is, if you want to follow along this Calgary sports fans journey on my YouTube channel, just make sure you subscribe. I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, but I also do a variety of content in terms of personal vlogs, attempt at comedy, and I also do share my experience sitting on the road or a sport event. But I felt it was fun to look at Calgary sports teams from the past, and here we're up to episode number 21. So other inspirations was when I took in the Calgary Hitman Corral series, when I looked at some of those hockey teams in the past, as well as local clothing company See a Dead Clothing, where they specialize in Calgary sports teams in the past that I've already talked about, and a few that I still plan to talk about later in this series. But they've seemed to have also branched out in terms of putting on past Calgary landmarks and even a radio station. So check them out, as well as that Chris Wilson story from CBC showing his Calgary jersey collection. So I have all that in the description below, as well as all the relics and my sources that I gathered to share in this video. So if you want to see the previous episode in my Remember the Calgary series, I talked about the Calgary Rangers and Bronx going way back to almost 100 years. So you can see that episode if you are interested, as well as any other episodes in my Remember the Calgary series in the playlist as well. So let's get talking to episode 21 for the Chinooks and Mustangs. So this team, if you look at the logos from the beginning, actually did not start off in Calgary. It started off in the Crowsnest Pass, beginning in the 1972 to 1973 season. In the Alberta Junior Hockey League, the Crowsnest Pass is kind of in the southwest corner of Alberta. It's on Highway 3. That's the road you take if you're going to go to, Sparwood, Fernie, or Cranbrook, and I definitely love going to Fernie. So that's where that team started off, which is the last, municipality district in Alberta before you get into BC, and the southern way to get into the Canadian Rockies. And then they were known as the Pass Red Devils. So that's an interesting name for the Crowsnest Pass. However, this team was not very successful. They did not do too much winning on the ice, as I'll get to shortly. So then that team, they moved down, going east on Highway 3, and then going just a little south to Pincher Creek. So they moved from the Crowsnest Pass to Pincher Creek for the 1976-77 season. They were first known as the Pincher Creek Panthers. So they were the Crowsnest Pass, the Red Devils, and now the Pincher Creek Panthers. And then in 1977-78 season, Pincher Creek changed their name from the Panthers to the Chinooks. And then the team relocated from Pincher Creek right here to Calgary for the 1978-79 season, and they kept the name the Chinooks for that one season. So there was the Calgary Chinooks when they first moved from Pincher Creek. I couldn't find any logos for the Chinooks team. I know the Chinook is always known for the warm western winds that come from the Canadian Rockies that give us a break from the cold winters, but that is the Chinooks. So then after the 1978-79 season, the team rebranded as the Calgary Spurs. So then it was the Calgary Spurs up until under new ownership. That's why they got rebranded. So then the Calgary Spurs existed until the 1989-90 season. Then what happened is that the Spurs actually ceased operations as they went bankrupt. However, the Alberta Junior Hockey League, the AJHL, wanted to keep a second Calgary-based team in Calgary with the competing Calgary Canucks. The team was revived as the Calgary Royals. So in 1990, the team kind of was reborn as the Calgary Royals, as a group of local 4 businesses bought the team. And then they had some initial success by winning the league title. However, they never duplicated that success. And then they kept falling behind support with the Calgary Canucks as well. After going into the 1990s, we had the Calgary Hitmen in town, as well as the Calgary Flames, the NHL team. So as much as we are obsessed with hockey in Calgary, maybe there is some saturation with all the teams. So that's the Calgary Royals. And then the franchise renamed themselves as the Mustangs, starting in the 2009-10 season. That's the logo that you see in the thumbnail that I use. I just couldn't think of what would be one good thumbnail I found at the time. So that is the last team that donned this name. And then the team were backed by sponsors and volunteers to keep afloat during this time. And they also wanted to differentiate themselves from the Calgary Royals, because just like if you go back to my Calgary Buffaloes, there's actually a hockey academy called the Calgary Royals as well, where it develops, under 15, 16, 17, like junior teenager league. So you have a Calgary Buffaloes and a Calgary Royals hockey academy as well. So they wanted to differentiate themselves from that. So that's why they changed the name to the Calgary Mustangs. After struggling financially, the team was given a leave of absence for the 2019-20 season. And then that was the last season that the Calgary Royals were around. And then unfortunately, also with the global pandemic of COVID-19, the entire Alberta Junior Hockey League has ceased in operations for the time being. However, this franchise was ultimately granted approval for the start of the 2021-22 season. They will be moving shop to be just north of Red Deer in the town of Blackfalds for the 2021-22 season. And it's a nice looking logo for the Blackfalds Bulldogs. And it was being sold by owner Dan Quinn. That's who bought the team, the Calgary Mustangs, to move it to Blackfalds. So we'll see how the Blackfalds Bulldogs does. So that's the journey of the franchise from when it started off as the past Red Devils in the Crowsnest Pass, and then it changed to Pincher Creek to become the Panthers, and then eventually they had the Chinooks name, and then when the team moved to Calgary, then it had the Chinooks team for the first season, and then they were the Spurs for 10 seasons, and then they turned the name the Royals and the Mustangs. That's the era that I remember more with the Royals and Mustangs. So that's just the overview of the franchise. So let's just take a look at some notes here first. So since the team started off in the Crowsnest Pass as the Red Devils, let's talk about them first. So they operated from 1972 to 1976 as they were the Red Devils before they moved to the city of Pincher Creek, or the town of Pincher Creek. Their 4-season tenure in Crowsnest Pass was mostly unsuccessful, because it talks about the Red Devils never finished a season with more wins than losses. So that's one of the reasons why the team moved from the Crowsnest Pass to Pincher Creek, as they never had a winning season of a record over 500. Their worst season in the Alberta Junior Hockey League history was in the 1974-75 season. Get this, the Red Devils were 3-56-1. Yeah, that's not a good season. Other than you have the Calgary Cowboys, not the WHA team, but I didn't find any information. I talked about them, that junior team with the Buffaloes. It mentions that there was the Calgary Cowboys and the Toronto Falcons recorded worse records, but they folded mid-season. I think I mentioned that in that episode. If you go back to episode 18, I believe. Yeah, episode 18, that's where I talked about the Cowboys and Buffaloes in that episode. They still hold their league record for a 28-game losing streak that's still as of 2005. So the team definitely did not see success in the Crowsnest Pass. However, there was another team that was in the Crowsnest Pass later on in the Alberta Junior Hockey League from 1998 to 2004. They had the Timberwolves, so they had a little more success there as well. So, I mean, in the 1972-73 season, I mean, in 60 games, they were 27-33. They finished 4th overall, but they lost in the semifinals 4-2 to the Red Deer Rustlers. And then 1973-74, which actually was their best season with 59 points, where they were 29-30-1 with 1 tie. They finished 4th overall. They actually defeated the Calgary Canucks, so they pulled off an upset 4-1 in the playoffs, but then they lost to the Red Deer Rustlers again 4-1. And that was the last time that the past Red Devils made the playoffs, because in 1974-75, as mentioned, was the record-breaking on the wrong end, having one of the worst seasons in league history, where they were 3-56-1 for only 7 points. Get this, they had 169 goals for and 467 goals against. Finished 6th overall and didn't make the playoffs. I guess there was only 6 teams in the league at that time. And then in the last season, before they moved shot to Pincher Creek, they improved a little, but they were, in a 60-game season, they were 15-45 for 30 points. Finished 6th overall and did not make the playoffs. So that's the past Red Devils. So the team did not start off very well to begin with. But now when we look at the Pincher Creek Panthers, as that they moved from the Crowsnest Pass, they played in the from 1976 to 1978, and then in 1979 they changed as the Panthers. So looking at their records, if I can find, I have to find the website as well for the Pincher Creek Panthers, as they were before they moved to Calgary. So the Panthers was 1976-78, and then the Chinooks was 78-79. So all the team did was, well, they definitely did not have that much more success when it comes to what the Red Devils left behind, is that in the 1976-77 season, they were 12-47-1 for 25 points for 6th overall. However, they actually made the playoffs, and they actually lost to the Calgary Canucks. So we beat on the team that eventually was going to be the cousin team of the Calgary Canucks, where the Calgary were we the Chinooks and the Spurs at that time. In 1977-78, when they were still known as the Panthers, in 60 games they were 18-40-2, so still another lousy record. But they still actually made the playoffs, but lost 2-4 this time to the Calgary Canucks. So that was the Pincher Creek Panthers that I could find for those 2 seasons. If I could find anything else for what else they did in the... I couldn't find any other records for the Pincher Creek Panthers when it comes to the following season before they moved to Calgary. So that is the Pincher Creek Panthers in a nutshell, as well as, I found the Summer Alex with the Panthers and Chinooks. I couldn't find any logos for the Chinooks, both in Pincher Creek and in Calgary. So that was the team before they went to Calgary. So the first season with the team moved from Pincher Creek to Calgary, when they were the Calgary Chinooks, their first season before they got rebranded as the Spurs, they were 23-37 in 60 games. So this team is still looking for its first season over 500 since it was established back in 1972. As they lost in the first round in that season, I was able to find a program from the Hockey Database website, but nothing for when it comes to logos. And then I know that one player that was on that team that we might recognize is Kerry Wilson, who eventually played for the Calgary Flames. I know, so this is kind of an alternative league for the Western Hockey League, but that was the Calgary Chinooks in the first season in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. And let's see who they lost to, or it says actually here they did not qualify, or actually they messed it up on the Wikipedia that 1978-79 as well. They mentioned the Calgary, the Pincher Creek Panthers, or Pincher Creek Chinooks as well, but it says here that in 78-79 they were 23-37 and did not make the playoffs, so there's some discrepancy there as well, but that is the first season when it was in Calgary as the Chinooks. So then when it got rebranded as the Calgary Spurs from 1979 to 1990. So in 11 seasons, well, they finally had some overall in the 11 seasons in 651 games. They had a record of 342 wins, 291 losses, and 18 ties for a winning percentage of 55.39 for 539. And in the first season when they were the Spurs, that was when the franchise had their first winning record In 60 games, they were 31, 28, and 1. And then their best season, I would say, the Calgary Spurs had when it comes to the regular season would have been the 1981-82 season. In 60 games, they were 49, 9 and 2. So that is the Calgary Spurs. And then I would take the worst season they had for the franchise when they were known as the Calgary Spurs was in 1987-88. They were 19, 38, and 3. So that was based on the Hockey Database website as well. As if you look at the season-by-season record, I mean, the first season that they were in Calgary as the Calgary Spurs, they did get swept in the first round by the Fort Saskatchewan Traders. And then 79-80, when they were that's the first season when they were the Chinooks, then the Spurs, because it was just how they broke it up on the Wikipedia website. If you look at the link, 79-80, when they had their first record over 500, they actually beat the Tabor Golden Suns 3-2, but then they lost to the Calgary Canucks in 1980 in the second round. So that was the first time they had an all-Calgary matchup. And then in the season that they had their best season overall, 1981-82, where they were 49, 9 and 2, they were first in the South Division. Well, they beat the Olds Grizzlies 4-0. And then they beat the Red Deer Rustlers 4-1 in the semifinals. And then they lost the league final in 7 games to the St. Albert Saints. So that's the furthest that the Calgary Spurs have gone on in their history. And then the last season for 1989-90, before the team went bankrupt and then eventually got rebranded as Calgary Royals, they were 22, 36, and 2 with the 46.3 in the South, but then they were swept to the Olds Grizzlies. But looking at the playoff history, well, the couple times that the Calgary Spurs actually played the Calgary Canucks, well, the Spurs and Canucks played in 1980, where the Canucks won that series in the semifinals in 4 straight. And then in 1983, they lost to the Calgary Canucks again in the quarterfinals, 4-0. And then in 1984-85, this is where the Spurs actually got the better of the Calgary Canucks as they won the quarterfinals 4-2, but then they lost to the Red Deer Rustlers 4 straight in the semifinals. And then the last time that the Spurs played the Calgary Canucks was 1987-88. Believe it or not, that season they were 1938 and 3, fourth in the South, but then they lost 4-1 to the Calgary Canucks. So it was only once when the Spurs were in the AJHL that they were surpassed by the Calgary Canucks. But the Calgary Canucks has been one of the more successful franchises in the Alberta Junior Hockey League by winning 9 league titles. So that is the Calgary Spurs. I mean, looking at the all-time roster on the Hockey Database, let's see if I can find any names that stand out for me that went on to the NHL. I mean, well, there's Don Henderson and Stu Hendry. Well, those names are big in the Calgary community. I have rinks named after him. I'm just trying to see if there's any names that I can find that played in the NHL that sticks to my mind right away. Oh yeah, Dana Merzen. He actually played for the Spurs. Eventually played for the Calgary Flames, including winning the Stanley Cup in 1989. And that is basically the Calgary Spurs. So that is the second team that we'll talk about in this episode as well. Going back to the Calgary Chinooks, so there's actually a few other teams from the past that on these ice fandom websites. Well, there was a team that also played in 1913-14 in senior hockey, and then there was also another junior team that played in 1918 and 19. So I found this as well on the hockey fandom site for the Calgary Chinooks. So I think we're done with the Chinooks part. So now let's talk about the Calgary Royals, where they were known as the Calgary Royals. All-time record in 20 seasons. This combines the Royals and the Calgary Royals from 1990 to 2010 before they got rebranded as the Mustangs. Well, the Calgary Royals in 1,210 games, they were 533 wins, 605 losses, 28 ties, and 28 overtime, and then 24 shield losses. That's how they broke it up. So their overall winning percentage was only .470. So they've lost more games than they won. I mean, their first season, I would say, was their best season, as I mentioned, in 1990-1991. In 56 games, they were 34, 18, and 4. So, and then their worst season was the 2008-9 season, where they, in 62 games they were 48, 1, and 5, which 5 is overtime losses as well. So if we look at when it comes to the season by season record, well, their first season, actually the 1990-1991 season, where they were the Calgary Royals, they actually played the Calgary Canucks in the first round, and they actually beat the Calgary Canucks 4 straight in the quarterfinals, and then they won the semifinals 4 straight against the Oil Barons, who are the, Fort McMurray Oil Barons, and then they actually won the AJHL championship on that, and then they lost 4 games to 2 to the, I think that's the Fort Saskatchewan Traders, so that's who they won 4 games to. But then they went to the Doyle Cup, but they lost 4 games to 1 to the Vernon Lakers of the BCHL, which that's where you see that RBC Cup Challenge, where you get like the Alberta Junior Hockey League, the BC Hockey League as well. It's a different junior hockey league that all compete for the Doyle Cup. So the other times that you could say that the Calgary Royals and Canucks played, if you go to 1995-96 season, well, the Calgary Canucks beat them 4 games to 1 that season. And then the other time that we played when the Royals were playing the Calgary Canucks was the 2000-2001 season. They won the preliminary series 3 games to 1. And then in 2001-2, they won against the Canucks again in 3 games to 2 as well. And then I think that's the last time that the Calgary Royals played the Calgary Canucks. And actually, when it includes the Royals and Mustangs, that's the last time we had an all-Calgary playoff series in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. So again, see a trend that when it comes to the Calgary Canucks, they're definitely a lot more superior team than the Calgary Royals or the Calgary Mustangs, or going back to the Spurs, or the Chinooks as well. So that's the Calgary Mustangs as well. And the Calgary Mustangs were rebranded, as mentioned, in the 2010 season. So overall, for the Calgary Mustangs from 2010 to 2019, in 540 games, they were 199 wins, 293 losses, and then there was no more ties anymore in hockey, so they had 35 overtime losses, and then they had 13 shootout losses. So they winning percentage is .413 overall, so just winning 40% of the games. And I would say the best season that the Calgary Mustangs had when they were the Mustangs, I would have to say would have been the 2011-12 season, where in 60 games they were 31, 22, and 6 with 69 points with a shootout loss. And then their worst season actually was the 2016-17 season. In 60 games they were 8, 50, 0, and 1. And one with the overtime and a shootout loss, and obviously didn't make the playoffs that year. They actually only missed the playoffs twice in 2016 and 2017, but this is where at the time where the Royals were definitely, and the Mustangs I should say, were looking to try to stay afloat for volunteers, as mentioned as well. They just were kind of that second team that I would say that wasn't behind the Calgary Canucks when it comes to the Alberta Junior Hockey League. Then you had competition when it comes to the Hitmen and the Calgary Flames. But notable NHL alumni that actually played when it comes to the Royals that's highlighted from the Wikipedia page. Well, you have TJ Gagliardi, who actually happened to also play for the Calgary Hitmen, as well as the Calgary Flames. I would say TJ Gagliardi was a lot better as a Calgary Hitman, wasn't as good when he was a Calgary Flame, as well as Cale Hulse. Remember Cale Hulse, where he actually had 2 stints with the Calgary Flames. He played for the Royals. And then you got Christopher Kalanos. A lot of these players are also from the Calgary area. He was in the Flames organization when the franchise was like in Quad City, as well as, trying to think, Quad City and Omaha Ex-Urban Knights as well. But he was a part of the franchise, but he never played for the Calgary Flames. And then you have Tyler Sloan. I think the biggest name that played for the Calgary Royals is Jay Beagle, who I know he's played some time as the Washington Capital, as well as Brendan Cozen, who actually happened to play for the Calgary Hitmen and was a part of the 2010 WHL championship team. So that is some notable NHL alumni that I could find that played for the Royals and Mustangs as well. Let's just see the all-time roster, if I can pick any other names for the Calgary Mustangs. that played in the NHL that stands out. Well, I know there's an Adam Bookeboom. I think he's related to Jeff Bookeboom, who played many seasons in the NHL as well. I'm just trying to see some other big names that stick out right away. But you can see the links for yourself in the description below for all the other names that played. But this team definitely has been around for over 50 years when you're looking, going back from the Pincher Creek and the Crowsnest Pass, and then in Calgary, and now eventually in Blackfalds. So the Alberta Junior Hockey League right now, there is 15 teams in the league right now. The most recent championship was actually the Brooks Bandits, where they won their 5th championship. And I said the Calgary Canucks are actually the most successful team with 9 championships as well. The current teams that are in the Alberta Junior Hockey League right now, just shares out here, and I also mentioned that the teams that Calgary, all the versions of the Calgary, when it comes to the Chinooks, Spurs, Royals and Mustangs, as I know they all played from the Father David Bauer Arena, while the Calgary Canucks play in the Max Bell Center. Well, the Father David Bauer Arena is near the university. It's been around since 1963. But there's the North Division. You have the Bonnyville Pontiacs, and then you have the Drayton Valley Thunder, and then you got the Fort McMurray Oil Barons, and then you have the Grand Prairie Storm, and then you got the Lloydminster Bobcats, the Sherwood Crusaders, the St. Bruce Grove Saints, and the Whitecourt Wolverines. So that's in the North Division. And then the South Division, well, you got the Brooks Bandits, and then you got the Calgary Canucks, and then you have the Camrose Kodiaks, the Canmore Eagles, the Drumheller Dragons, the Okotoks Flyers, and the Olds Grizzlies as well. So that's the all the teams. And then the future teams, well, as I mentioned, the Blackfalds Bulldogs will be the team that the Calgary Mustangs are moving from as well. So we're looking at some other teams from the past, if I can find some other teams from the past. If I can scroll down as well. If I can find it, let's bypass that for now, because I have all the links in the description below for when it comes to all the teams that are in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. But that's basically the gist when it comes to the Calgary Spurs, the Royals, the Mustangs, as well as the Chinooks when it comes to the Alberta Junior Hockey League. So I'm going to take a break, and then I'll come back, because there is some bonus content that I'll share as well, as that there was actually another Calgary Spurs team as well, in a different identity, but I'm also sneaking in this episode as well. And then just give you my final thoughts before I gee up the next episode. So let me go get my other Spurs notes, and I'll be back. I am back, and let's talk about the other Calgary Spurs team that actually predates the main team that I talked about in this episode. Well, you got the Calgary Spurs, and they only were the Calgary Spurs in this case. They only existed for 3 seasons, from 1965 to 1968, in the Western Canada Senior Hockey League, in 104 games over the 3 seasons. They actually had a pretty good record, as they were 64, 35, and 5 for a .639 winning percentage. And then in the first season, 65-66, they were 26-6 overall in 32 games. And then 96-6-67 in 36 games, they were 24-10-2. And then the last season, which they wasn't as good, as in 36 games, they were 14-9-3. And then the whole time they were coached by a coach named Tony Schneider. So the other, that was based on the Hockey Database website. As I mentioned, the senior team that the Spurs entered in 1964-65, the Alberta Senior Playoffs as an independent from a non-league, but they lost in the semifinals. So they made their way to get into the league before they got into the league. And then they actually were able to get to the Allen Cup final in 1967, but they lost the Allen Cup, which is the championship trophy when it comes to the Senior Hockey League. And then when it comes to the playoffs here, is that they lost in the West quarterfinal in the 1966 season, and then they won then they got to the finals in 1966-67, but then lost to the Allen Cup final, and then they lost in the semifinals in the 3rd season as well. So that's all I can touch on when it comes to the Calgary Spurs when it comes to the senior hockey league team. Looking at the all-time roster, I mean, it's hit or miss what you can find when it comes to any teams from the past on who stands out in the NHL. There's no names that I could find that played for the Spurs back in the day that actually made it to the NHL or had a big name. They're all local players, and a lot of players that ultimately play for these teams don't make it to the NHL anyway, but it's also an alternative way for some teams to maybe attract attention for the NHL scouting, because the Western Hockey League, part of the Canadian Hockey League Network, is the primary development league when it comes to hockey, but this is definitely an alternative. So kind of all over the place with this episode because this team changed identity 4 times, as I mentioned. I mean, it started off in Pincher Creek, going back to the main team in Ham when I said the Chinooks to the Mustangs. I mean, it started off in Pincher Creek as the Red Devils, and I guess it was very double how bad they were when the 4 seasons that they played in the Crowsnest Pass, and then they moved to Pincher Creek to be known as the Panthers, and then the Chinooks, and then they moved to Calgary, keeping the Chinooks name for a season, and then they got rebranded as the Spurs, then they got revived as the Royals, and then they got rebranded as the Mustangs. Before this team is slated to move to Blackfalds for the 2021-22 season, and then it's hit or miss to find leading scorers or who was the all-time leading scorer. Some seasons I found on the Hockey Database website, you couldn't get any rosters or any stats for all the seasons as well, but I have all that in the description below. So I just say, what do you remember from, I guess you could say, the Chinooks, Spurs, Royals, and Mustangs, and I guess also the Senior Hockey League Spurs team as well. As you can definitely tell, it gets all the Western themed names as well in this episode. In my Remember the Calgary Series, I definitely have a lot more relics that I share at the end of the episode, like a lot of interesting program covers and pocket schedules and even some logo. And I think there's one logo that I found online that when it was the Calgary Spurs, it looked like a tweaked version of the Quebec Nordiques logo as well. But I just say, what memories do you have from these teams as well? I mean, me personally, I remember more as the Royals as well as the Mustangs. Definitely a lot more of the Royals. But I know this team always fell second behind the Calgary Canucks when it comes to the supremacy when it comes to Alberta Junior Hockey League. I mean, you already got the Calgary Hitmen as the main Junior Hockey League team in Calgary. And then obviously you got the Calgary Flames as well, which I think it's quite impressive to think we have, a couple major hockey teams in the city that for a while we were able to float to, junior hockey leagues as well, a step below the Western Hockey League when it comes to the Calgary Hitmen. But it's nice to, see these teams travel all over the province of Alberta where they can support their team as well. And I'd say best of luck in Blackfalds. We'll see how the Bulldogs go. I'd say that's definitely a pretty good logo for the Blackfalds Bulldogs. So there's a little bit of Calgary legacy going up into Blackfalds as well. That's all I have for this episode. So when it comes to the next episode that I plan to talk about in my Remember the Calgary Series, episode 22, I'm going to talk about the Cougars and Trojans. And I actually was surprised that one of the teams that actually wound up being one of the teams that I ultimately thought it was, but it's worth talking about them as well from their identity. And then I just kind of mashed those 2 teams' names together because, being that I went to SAIT as well as a Trojan fan. However, the clue I'm going to give is that it's not the Trojans, that the team that I associate with when I went to college at SAIT. It's the other team that I was actually surprised at what it is when I first researched it as well. So that will be the next episode. And actually that will be the last hockey episode where I'll talk about hockey teams in my Remember the Calgary Series, because we're getting towards the end of the series, looking at Calgary sports teams and fast. That based on what I can find in terms of relics or any other information I can find, and some episodes have been a lot more easier than others. But that's all I have for this episode in my Remember the Calgary Series. I couldn't find the defunct teams link that I thought I found, but I might have it in the description below among the many links that I have as well. And then after, when I talk about the Cougars and Trojans in the next episode, the last episodes that I have remaining in my series that I plan to talk about. Episode 23, we're going to go from the rink to the ball diamond. That I'll talk about the Calgary Vipers. And then in episode 24, we'll get to talk about the Calgary Cannons. I think that would be the team that I think most Calgary sports fans missed the most. And in episode 25, I'll talk about Stampede Wrestling. In episode 26, I'll just put a bow on this series and give my final recap on what I think I might do in that episode to give a preview. Depending on how long it's going to take me to edit and cut it together, is that in every episode I always ask that question. Or questions, in the case of this episode. If you remember this team, I might do a montage of all that in that video as well. So anyways, like I say, if you want to follow along this Calgary sports fan's journey, Home of the Flames, Sabin, and Roughnecks and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, and this is also one of them, talking about sports teams of the past, so what I can find. But I also do have a variety of non-sports content when it comes to like personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experiences when I'm on the road or a sporting event. So if it all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, you know what you do, just make sure you like, subscribe. I also have my other social media down in the description below. So I'm going to say Calgary is also used to be home to the Chinooks, Spurs, Royals, and Mustangs as well. So I just want to say thanks for watching, and we'll have some more relics that I'll show at the end of this video before it closes. And I'll say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.